All right, welcome back, folks, to Did Syd Barrett. And in this mini-series, I would like to kind of examine the connection between Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd and the Beatles. And there are quite a few interesting connections between those two bands and between Mr. Barrett and some folks in the orbit of the Beatles. And this will probably be like a three-part series, and I will try to break the music down in each of the episodes and answer a few questions. So before I get started, what I would kind of like to do is do kind of an introduction and discuss why this is a topic and why I think it's worth discussing. Now, in my very first episode, the introduction of Peeling Syd Barrett, I mentioned the money connection between numerous bands in the development of Monty Python's films Search for the Holy Grail and Life of Brian. And you can research that on your own. But basically there are a few people and a few bands that funded the development of those films. And that got me to thinking, well, if these guys are kind of connected with one another, how deep does that connection go? And you can read about that if you like. But basically there are a few people that we know helped to fund those films. One of them is George Harrison, a band is Led Zeppelin, and another band is Pink Floyd. And I believe that Genesis was as well, but I haven't been able to see that. I haven't been able to verify that one lately. So that got me kind of thinking, what's going on? Why are these people involved with the development of Monty Python? Which is one of my favorite comedic groups, but what's the connection really? And when you dig into it, you'll see that they're all kind of under contract with EMI. So that company kind of was funding a lot of the development of not just bands, but realized also that Monty Python was releasing comedy on tape. So they would be releasing recordings of shows, so also requiring sound production and release. So they were under contract as well with EMI. Now, one of the most interesting things for me to consider is the following. From December of 66 to April of 67, the Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is a very strange album and a very strange title. They released it in May of 67, and they were recording that at Abbey Road under EMI, and that was produced by George Martin. Now, at the same time that they were recording their album, Pink Floyd was recording their initial album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. So they recorded from February to May of 67, and they released in August of 67. And their producer was Norman Smith. Now, if you're familiar at all with Norman Smith, you'll realize, of course, that not only are Pink Floyd and the Beatles recording at the same studio, but Norman Smith was an engineer for the Beatles for a very long time before he was, I guess you could say, promoted to being a producer around 65. And it's a little bit odd that he's working with Pink Floyd, in my opinion. Why is that? Well, how do you go from working with the Beatles to working with Pink Floyd? And realize at the time that Pink Floyd was kind of an underground band and wasn't what we would understand Pink Floyd to be in the future. So a few questions I have. One, why do they get to play at Abbey Road when they haven't even proven themselves at all, especially at the same time as the Beatles? What did somebody see or somebody hear? What made someone think that this band was going to be deserving of that kind of treatment? And why would they assign someone like Norman Smith to work with Pink Floyd? That indicates to me that they somebody knew what Pink Floyd could be. I suppose another thing that is interesting to me is in the Beatles book. And I'll give you a quote from there. Well, not really a quote, but it's by Bob Spitz. It's the Beatles. That's the title. And I'll throw the information for the book up here for you. But essentially, it's copyright in 2005. Little Brown and Company, Time Warner Book Group, New York, New York. Now, on page 424, there is a discussion of the Beatles giving a throwaway song to the Rolling Stones, and how the Beatles felt that they could donate music or use songs like a form of currency between bands. Currency for what? I don't know, but it indicates right there that they were willing to let other bands have songs. You have to ask the question then, are they also receiving songs at all? Well, if you study Norman Smith, you'll find out that actually one of his songs that he had written was purchased by the Beatles. And I'll give you the information for that here. So it looks like, in my opinion, that you have this kind of trading of music and music ideas that indicate a much more fluid method of development of music and songs than we, as the public, perhaps may understand, or perhaps even were led to believe. And that makes me ask the question, did Syd Barrett the Beatles, or did he work with the Beatles in some way? I think most folks would realize that there are kind of three eras of Beatles music. The very first era, which is kind of a pop classic rock and roll style, and then they get into kind of a psychedelic art rock style, and then they finish up with a much more, I guess you could say, rhythm and blues or bluesy rock, and some of that is a little bit political and social commentary. And those three eras are significant changes to the music. So what I would like to do is, in this episode, I want to tear apart what some of the influences of the Beatles may have been, or what influences might have been acting on the Beatles when they put together that first era. And then in the next episode, we'll do the second era. And then the last episode, we'll do the third era and some of John Lennon's solo material. And we'll look for traces of Mr. Barrett in that material. Now, if you followed along with Peeling Syd Barrett, we've indicated what his inclinations are, what are his patterns, what are his themes, what is his methodology. And we'll kind of try to do the same thing here. We're going to examine the very early Beatles. We'll set up kind of how they made lyrics, how they put together songs. Then we'll look at the second era, which is kind of the psychedelic art rock era, progressive. And then the third era, and John Lennon's solo material as well. We'll do the same thing. Now, there are a number of videos that I would like for you to kind of review. There's a lot of information that kind of goes into the making of this before I get started on things. So some of these I'll explain and some of these I won't. Now, the first video that I would kind of like you to check out is George Harrison leaves the Beatles. And this is audiofighter-com, I believe, posted it. And why that is interesting, now there's a lot of extra material that kind of came out about the Beatles just recently with Get Back, that film, and there's a lot of kind of background information that's included in there. And why am I showing you that specific cut? And the reason is because I want to show that there wasn't necessarily a whole lot of agreement about what would be happening and whether the band would be staying together or not. And a lot of people have historically blamed Yoko Ono for the breakup of the Beatles. But if you watch that clip specifically, you'll notice that Mr. Harrison already is kind of ready to move on. Now, he mentions a couple things, like he's going to leave, he's done, with the band. And then they begin immediately to discuss residuals. So he kind of says he doesn't want to really talk about that. That's why they made Apple. So bring in some other musicians and other folks, and then they'll have a talk about the residuals, and he says that's why we made Apple. So that at least shows Mr. Harrison's understanding of the point of the development of the company that the Beatles put together. You'll also notice that almost immediately someone says, "Are we still rolling?" And then they cut the film because immediately they kind of recognize that that's not something that should really be talked about on film for a number of reasons. And of course, one of those could be that it's an indicator that not always are the Beatles as a group putting together all of the music. There could be other musicians and other people, session musicians, coming in and playing specific parts. Not a big deal, I guess, in a lot of ways, but perhaps that would tarnish what some people think is the image of the band. Now, there is a second video that is posted by Air One, I think. At any rate, it's basically showing George Harrison getting shocked by a microphone. And the reason I'm including this is, of course, there's a story about Mr. Barrett also getting shocked on a microphone during their tour in the U.S. And some people think, it was a bad shock or not. But I don't know. It's just something interesting to me that perhaps there were a lot of shocks happening then. A lot of bands were kind of wiring their own gear, and perhaps there wasn't the best kind of consistency in the way they were doing it or the materials that were being used. So I suspect getting shocked was kind of not too uncommon. Some people will say that Mr. Barrett was a little bit odd after he had been shocked. I don't know, perhaps he was just mad, perhaps there was other things going on, but this indicated to me that the possibility to get shocked by a microphone is somewhat common, I would think. Now, another video that I would like to recommend is the craziest edit in history, posted by You Can't Hear This, and it's about the Beatles and Strawberry Fields. Now, I won't talk about that right now. I'll talk about that later when I discuss Strawberry Fields. Another video to follow up with that is Syd Barrett reviews the singles. That's posted by yesterday's papers. You may check that out as well. I won't get into why I'm going to discuss that right now. I will discuss that later. Another video is Hendrix live playing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I won't get into why I'm going to discuss that right now. I'll just give you the link to the video of the actual video of him playing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Another video that I'll suggest is The Surprising Story of Abbey Road, Side 2. It's posted by a Fab4 archivist, and that I'm not going to get into that one right now either, but it's basically about the album Abbey Road. Another video is Did Paul Die in 1966? History Vinyl Rewind. And basically that gentleman goes through and he analyzes the entire all the little minutiae that's tied to the great conspiracy theory, I guess you would say, that Mr. McCartney died in 1966. And I won't get into that one right now either. I'll just give you the link for that as well. Another one I will discuss is a link about John Lennon discussing David Bowie and Elton John. It's posted by Marcelo Durham, and I will discuss that right here. If you watch that link, it specifically says John Lennon mentions that in those days you couldn't say who was filling in or playing if they weren't part of the band. A very interesting statement. Now, I won't get into all the money reasons and all the contractual reasons why that may be the case, or maybe perhaps people need to hide the fact that they're moonlighting, or they're simply not allowed to work with other musicians by contract or by company. But I will say that it's very interesting that in that clip, Mr. Lennon specifically says that not always could they truthfully say who was putting together the music or who they were working with. Another video that I'll suggest is HDPINKFLOYD, and it has a whole bunch of the whole bunch of names of the band, Rick Wright, Syd Barrett, etc. I'll give the link, and they basically discuss within there. Mr. Roger Waters does at any rate. About 12 minutes and 15 seconds in, Mr. Waters says that Mr. Barrett didn't want to play Top of the Pops. And one of the things he specifically said is John Lennon doesn't have to do this, so why do I? Now, for me, as a kind of a Syd Barrett enthusiast, I guess you could say, My initial thought when I hear something like that is, what does that have to do with anything? Why would Mr. Barrett feel that because John Lennon isn't doing Top of the Pops, he shouldn't? John Lennon, of course, is with the Beatles. He's a proven songwriter. He's probably the most famous person in the world at that point in time. Why would Mr. Barrett compare himself to John Lennon? Well, there's only so many reasons. One is he's incredibly arrogant. Another would be that he's incredibly foolish or crazy. But in my opinion, in reviewing Mr. Barrett's work, I don't think he's either one of those things. I don't find him to be overly arrogant. In fact, I find him to be quite demure. And I will point out that although he's a different way of looking at things and a different way of expressing himself, most of his actions, I think, you can find reasons why they may be logical. So this seems like an illogical statement, but perhaps it was logical to him. How could it be so? Well, there is another quote, and that quote is by his sister, Rosemary. And on page 371 of Mr. Chapman's book, The Life of Syd Barrett, A Very Irregular Head, and this is, let's see, it's a Capo press. Again, I'll give all the information in the description. Capo press, 2010, copyright by Mr. Chapman, and Boston, Massachusetts. At any rate, on page 371, Miss Rosemary, who is Mr. Barrett's little sister, mentions why perhaps Mr. Barrett was such a recluse, and she specifically lets slip something. She says, fame, people tend to latch onto fame like what happened to poor John Lennon. Now, that may seem kind of like a side statement that may not mean much, but for some reason she has chosen to compare her brother to John Lennon. Interesting, isn't it, that also Mr. Barrett had chosen to compare himself to John Lennon. So why would these people be choosing to compare Mr. Barrett to John Lennon? Do they know something a little bit more than perhaps the rest of us may know? Now, there are a lot of people within the industry that considered Mr. Barrett to be the finest songwriter of all time. And in my review of his work, I would have to say yes. I would say, in my opinion, the three great songwriters of this era are Bob Dylan, John Lennon, and Syd Barrett. But is there some indication in the work that perhaps there may be a little bit more going on? Perhaps there's some kind of interaction between the two. Is there a trade of music happening between the groups? They do work for the same company, after all. They were recording in the same area. And you have to also remember, of course, that John Lennon was involved with Yoko Ono, and she was involved with the Art Underground, as was Mr. Barrett, quite significantly. And Mr. Lennon also had attended the 14-hour Technicolor Dream, which Pink Floyd was headlining at that time. So there's a lot of opportunities there for kind of crossover and cross-pollination, and perhaps there's some kind of tit-for-tat happening in some ways. Perhaps that might help explain why Pink Floyd gets to record at this great studio with this great band with one of their great engineers as their producer. It certainly does seem to be a lot of favors, and perhaps it benefited everyone to have Pink Floyd's music get made. And perhaps financially that would have benefited the Beatles as well. I don't know. But there's quite a significant amount of cross-pollination going on there, and you'll have to kind of, I guess you could say, make a judgment on your own as to whether or not you think that there may actually have been direct interaction between the two bands or exchanging of music. Another video that I'll suggest you watch is titled Why Paul McCartney's Contributions to Dark Side Were Deleted, and that's posted by Nebo Shah Lennon. And the reason I'm including that is, of course, if you're not aware, and we did discuss this a little bit and did Syd Dark Side of the Moon, Paul McCartney was part of that question and answer session that Pink Floyd used as kind of background filler, I suppose you could say, for the Dark Side of the Moon album. Although they chose not to use his contributions to it. The larger questions are not necessarily why didn't they use his contributions. The larger question for me is, why is Paul McCartney making contributions? For example, is he there out of friendship? Was there a closeness with the band? They were, as we'll find out here in a moment, quite familiar with one another. So was he doing so out of friendship? Was it a tit for tat? Was it a favor for a favor? Was he paid to be there? Was he asked to be there by the label? Was he asked to be there by EMI? Was he being used to help promote their album potentially? These are all questions that I think are important because they would indicate what the dynamic is between the two bands. The last video I'll suggest that you watch is a video of Paul McCartney talks hearing Pink Floyd, and that's posted by Secrets of Rock. Now this is important because Paul McCartney admits in this very video that there is interaction between the two bands, at least with the engineers on the Dark Side of the Moon album. And of course, if they're doing it during the Dark Side of the Moon album recordings at Abbey Road, were they also doing it during recording of Piper at the Gates of Dawn? You would have to, I think, be a little bit heavy-handed, I suppose you could say, in your thinking if you believe that they were completely alien to one another during Piper at the Gates of Dawn, but yet friendly enough to share music and techniques for Dark Side of the Moon. So there's an indication directly of influence between the two bands upon one another. So what I would like to do then is let's go ahead then and let's take a look at some of the music, just the very early period of the Beatles, and then I'm going to get into comments and corrections, and I'll do that at the end of this video. Usually I do that at the beginning, but this time around I'm going to do it at the end. So let's start off with 8 songs. I'm just going to take 8 songs, no real rhyme or reason to this, and I'm going to look at the lyrics and we'll discuss them. And in particular, I want to look at the themes and some of the techniques that are being used lyrically. I may make some comments about the music as well. I don't know. We'll see. But let's see if we can detect any Syd Barrett in the early Beatles music. And of course, we wouldn't expect to find too much because Mr. Barrett really wasn't active musically until 65, 66. And the Beatles already were doing quite well previous to that. So the first song that I would kind of like to tear apart is a song called Love Me Do. Now this is kind of their breakout song. It was released as a single. It's attributed to Lennon and McCartney and was released in 62 and was under Parlophone and recorded at Abbey Road or EMI Studios. So let's take a look at the lyrics. Very, very simple song. It opens with a harmonica that Mr. Lennon is playing. If you would pull up the lyrics on your phone or something, you can follow along with me. So, love me do, love you, always be true, so please let me do. So a very, very simple rhyme structure, always at the end, very little alliteration. Do, you, true, and do. I don't know if you can get any easier than that, right? Do, you, true, and do. Let's look at the next portion, exactly the same thing. Then someone to love, someone new, love, and you. So again, continuation with love and you, do, you, true, then it just repeats. And that's it. And such a mind-numbingly boring song. It's delivered very well. There is one thing in here that I find redeemable, and that is the Love Me Do, actually, in the title. Now, in our Peeling Syd Barrett Apples and Oranges, I think we went down and broke down phonetically the similarity between certain constants in the mouth. So in this case, D and T. So love me do or love me too, which is consistent with content. So I know in the song the person says, "I'll always be true, so please love me do," or "so please do love me," or "so please love me too." In a way, it's playing with that word, and Mr. Lennon, of course, was kind of famous later on for playing with a lot of words. I'm not sure exactly. This is attributed to both Lennon and McCartney, so it's hard to know exactly who wrote this. But very, very simple. And I guess it's a little bit quaint. But when I didn't like the Beatles, this is one of the songs that I would give as a reason as to why I didn't like the Beatles, because of this inanely insipid song. So let's move on to the next one. She Loves You. Now, this was released in August of '63, again as a single, attributed again to Lennon McCartney. Again, Parlophone, and recorded at Abbey Road with George Martin producing. So let's take a look at the lyrics. If you would, pull up She Loves You. So, she loves you, then yeah, yeah, yeah. A bunch of yeahs. Loves you, yeah, yeah. And, I mean, there's really nothing there. Now let's go to the first verse, and they say that you lost your love, saw yesterday, but thinking of. So there we go. We're rhyming love and of again at the very end of the line. That's all. There's no internal rhyme. There's lost and love are a form of alliteration, but that's about it. Told me what to say. Okay, so love of. Say and yesterday, right? Very, very simple rhyme structure. Again, loves you can't be bad. Loves you, you should be glad. So there's so many yous being used, so many pronouns. Of course, by design, you want to mass market something that's a pop song. You would be using as many pronouns as possible so people think that it applies to them when it doesn't. So, bad and glad. Very simple. Rhyme structure, extremely different from anything that Mr. Barrett would ever make. And she says that you hurt her, and so, and knows, and then mind and kind, not the hurting kind. And that's about it. Mind, kind, so, and know. It's mind-numbingly bad. The song, I think, is actually, pretty catchy, but the lyrics are, I mean, as far as poetic concerns go, this is mind-numbingly bad, in my opinion. So, let's continue on. The next song, I Want to Hold Your Hand. So if you would, pull up the lyrics to I Want to Hold Your Hand. Now, this was released in October of '63, again attributed to Lennon McCartney. Again under Parlophone, recorded at EMI or Abbey Road, and again produced by George Martin. So now if you'll notice, a lot of these early songs are kind of, there's a lot of harmony in the background. I actually want to call the early Beatles something like the Beatle Boys or the Beachles. They remind me so much of the Beach Boys, the way that they deliver their music. Of course, they're singing fairly simple songs, but the method of delivery feels a lot like the Beach Boys to me. And interestingly enough, the Beach Boys also signed by EMI. So let's take a look here. I want to hold your hand. I'll tell you something, understand something, hand, hand, hand. So there's a rhyme with understand and hand. Now these rhymes and these word combinations are not consistent with Mr. Barrett at all. I can't think of a time that he was understand in hand. But okay, so the next portion is please say to me, be your man, me, hand. So rhyming of man with hand and a constant repeating of hand. And when I touch you, so there's a change up to the chorus. Touch you, happy inside, love, hide, hide, hide. So inside and hide, very simple again. Poetically not overly interesting. And yeah, you got something, rhymes something with something, and then understand and hand in hand. incredibly mind-numbingly boring. Not don't get me wrong, not a bad song. Just lyrically, very, very boring. So the last, or the last of the very early Beatles, let's call it that, and we'll see a change here in just a minute in their music, a significant change in my opinion. We'll look at All My Lovin'. So this is a single, All My Lovin', if you would call up the lyrics to All My Lovin' on your phone. Released in November of '63, again attributed to Lennon and McCartney, although supposedly mostly written by Mr. McCartney. Again, produced by George Martin and recorded at EMI under Parlophone. So let's take a look at the lyrics for this. A little bit more interesting, I suppose you could say, as far as lyrics go. So let's take a look. It starts out with a direction that you should close your eyes, and then they'll kiss you, and then miss you. Okay, so there we go. There is a two-word combination. I'll kiss you, I'll miss you. So inline rhyme between two lines. I'll kiss you, I'll miss you. And always be true. So there we go. A more interesting structure. So we have two lines and then a third line, and then I'm away every day, love to you. So there we have, I don't know what you would call that, almost like a triplet, rhyme connected with another triplet, another third line. So although the words being used, away, day, you, and true, are very simple, the structure has already become a little bit more complex. The next verse is, I'll pretend I'm kissing, lips I am missing. So I am kissing and I am missing. Okay, a little bit more complex again. And then true and the you, so another triplet. And while I'm away every day. So this again fits the same rhyme structure as the first verse. And in the chorus, all my lovin' send you, all my lovin', darling, I'll be true. I just want to point out how similar this is to Led Zeppelin's A Whole Lot of Love. The idea that you're going to give someone all of your love or give someone a whole lot of love. Very similar kind of a theme. A very different delivery, of course, but the theme of the song is very, very similar. Okay, so let's look at the next verse. Close your eyes, kiss you, miss you, always be true. And that's just a repeat. So very, very simple structure song, a little bit more complex than the other three. Again, very strong in harmony and very simple, not only in structure but also in the tendency of rhymes to be end of line rhyme and very minimal alliteration. So let's look at the first song, in my opinion, that's really interesting that the Beatles put together, or the first hit, I guess you could say. Now, please don't think that because I'm saying these are simple that I'm saying that the Beatles are simple. I'm just saying that they are simple, and for whatever reason. Now, of course, one reason that they may be simple is because the times were simple. And if you were making music that was meant to be bought or popular pop music that would be consumed by the general population, then you would want to give them what they wanted. And what people of the time of the late 50s, early 60s kind of wanted was bubblegum pop. And that's what the Beatles are making. Now, you can say that's all they could make, I guess, but I don't think that's entirely fair. Perhaps the writing that we're seeing is just because that's what would sell, just as an aside. So here, let's take a look at the first complicated theme, in my opinion, Can't Buy Me Love. So here's some background, and musically this is more interesting to me as well. Can't Buy Me Love, released in March of '64. Again, recorded EMI, Parlophone, under Parlophone, and again, George Martin is the producer. Now, this is important. In this song, there are no harmonies. There are no background harmonies. So the Beach Boys idea is already kind of going. They're already kind of moving on to trying something new. And I want you to pay attention to something here in just a moment. So it opens up with "Can't buy me love, love can't buy me love." Now, this idea of not being able to buy love is a very Beat generation idea. Before this, we simply had love songs. This is incorporating an additional idea, the idea of purchasing love, or well, let's run through the rest of the song and you'll see. But the previous songs were all very just lovey-dovey, simple songs. This is expressing something a little bit more complex. The idea that love is not for sale. Some form of love is not for sale. So let's take a look at what they have to say. Now they break out right away with the "Can't Buy Me Love" song, "Can't Buy Me Love," singing with quite a bit of gusto, I guess you could say. And then the tempo completely changes, and they say, "I'll buy you a diamond ring, my friend." Now, if you pay attention to that tempo change and the delivery, it's very jazzy. In my opinion, it sounds jazzy. The delivery, the timing of it, the drums, it's very jazzy in its sound, which is a significant change from the previous music. So let's take a look at the lyrics and the structure that's happening here. They say that they'll buy a diamond ring if it makes you feel all right. Get you anything. Okay, so they just did an inside line rhyme. Diamond ring with anything, and then they repeat the end, "my friend." If it makes you feel all right. So that's just a repeat. I don't care too much for money. Money can't buy me love. Now that's a completely different rhyme from the rest of the first from the first verse at the end, but it repeats in the next. Okay, so let's take a look at the next verse, verse 2. Give you all I've got to give. You say you love me too. May not have a lot to give, but I'll give to you. Okay, so there's a bunch of gives in there, so they rhyme give, and they rhyme to and you. In the first verse, they rhyme friend and friend with right and right. Again, not very complicated rhymes, but at least we're seeing some inline rhyme now. Diamond ring, anything, my friend. Do they do the same thing here in the second verse? All I've got, not have a lot. Yeah, they do the same exact thing. All I've got may not have a lot. All I've got, I'll give to you. Again, they repeat. I don't care too much for money. It can't buy me love. Then they sing, "Can't buy me love. Everybody tell me so. Can't buy me love." So you can see that as far as complexity of lyrics, it's already gotten a little bit more complex than earlier songs. Let's look at the next verse. They say that you should say that you don't need diamond rings, and I'll be satisfied. Or the satisfaction always makes me think of the Rolling Stones, but let's continue on. That you don't want those kinds of things. Now, no inline rhyme here, just rhyming rings with things. Money just can't buy. So satisfied with buy. Not a true rhyme, but still that long I sound. Don't care too much for money. Money can't buy me love. And the rest just repeats. And that's pretty much it. But for me, this is a big change in the Beatles sound. And not just in the sound, but also in the themes that are being expressed within the Beatles' music. And I will point out that that theme is one that's in the song "Bike" by Mr. Barrett, where he specifically says that he doesn't, that he'll give, pretty much whatever he has to whoever he really cares about, and that money doesn't really matter too much to him. So let's look at the next song that I would like to take a look at, which is "A Hard Day's Night." Now, "Hard Day's Night," attributed again to Lennon and McCartney, and supposedly mostly written by John Lennon. Released in July of '64. Again, Parlophone and EMI, and George Martin was the producer. So now there's a Ringo Starr story that may tie in with this, but I'll let you research that on your own. I just want to look at the lyrics here. So let's take a look at the lyrics. They start off right away. It's been a hard day's night, dog. Hard day's night, sleeping like a log. So just simple rhyming again, dog and log, night and night. When I get home to you, things you do, will make me feel alright. Very cool kind of an idea, I guess you could say. So you and do, again, there's the you and do thing. And the extensive use of pronouns we've discussed in Mr. Barrett's music, although in my opinion Mr. Barrett is using it not as a method to sell generalities. He's using yous and pronouns as a means towards deliberate obfuscation at times, which is not necessarily happening here in this song. So let's keep going. The next verse, you know, I'll work all day to get money to buy you things. Worth it to hear you say, you're going to give me everything. So thing rhymed with everything, day, and say. So why on earth should I moan, get you alone? I know I feel okay. And pretty much that's all of it. Right and tight, alone, moan. Very, very simple structures. Very, very simple word combinations. So let's move on to the next song, which is I Feel Fine. Now, these songs, in my opinion, you know, are they're good songs, don't get me wrong. It's just that they're lyrically extremely simple. So let's look at I Feel Fine, released in November of '64, attributed to both Lennon and McCartney, though supposedly mostly written by Mr. Lennon. Recorded again at EMI, and apparently produced or put together by Capo and Parlophone, and George Martin produced again. So let's look at this song and the lyrics and see what we've got. I Feel Fine. It starts off rolling right into the song. The first verse, he mentions that his baby's good to me, you know, happy as can be, you know. Said, because she said so. Wow, that right there is a wonderful break in timing. So not only do we have the good to me, happy as can be, so there we have the inline rhyme between lines, and then the end with you know, and then she said so. In a way, to me, this is the first really interesting change in lyric rhythm that the Beatles have used, and it reminds me of a song like Bike, where Mr. Barrett ends with "But I borrowed it. Take a couple if you wish, they're on a dish." So a very simple kind of she said so. 3-word combination that is off time, that separates these lyrics, and then I'm in love with her and I feel fine. Really, really wonderful. Again, very simple word combinations. No, no, so, feel fine. And let's look at the next verse. Baby says she's mine, you know, tells me all the time, you know, she said so. I'm in love with her and I feel fine. Pretty cool. Now the chorus starts with I'm glad that she's my little girl, and she's glad and telling all the world. So there's a girl world word combination, which is kind of new for them. Her baby buys her things, you know, buys her diamond rings, you know, she said so. Again, that odd rhythm, a wonderful odd rhythm in lyric delivery. She's in love with me and I feel fine. But the word combinations, again, very, very simple. Things, rings, no, no, feeling fine. And it pretty much just repeats from there. Now, the last early era Beatles song that I would like to take a look at is called 8 Days a Week. And let's take a look at that. So 8 Days a Week is released in December of '64. It was on the Beatles for Sale album. And let me type this in here real quick. Produced again by George Martin, attributed to Lennon and McCartney, though supposedly mostly written by Mr. John Lennon. And again, recorded at EMI or Abbey Road under Parlophone. So it starts out very cool. Again, now a lot of these songs to me are very jazzy in their sound, in their rhythm. So it starts off with "Ooh, I need your love, babe. Guess you know it's true." And then they just repeat, "Love you, babe. just like I Need You. So there again is True in You. Goes all the way back to Love Me Do, the same word combinations, repeats of Babe and Babe, Hold Me, Love Me, Hold Me, Love Me, Ain't Got Nothing But Love, Babe, 8 days a week. So really the most interesting idea is in this idea of 8 days a week. The next verse is Love You Every Day, Girl. So there's girl, and then they rhyme that with girl. Always on my mind, all the time. So mind and time. Again, very, very simple word rhymes. Then they go into the hold me, love me kind of thing. Nothing but love, 8 days a week. Very, very simple. Again, a good song, but good delivery, a nice pop song, but it is, in my opinion, very weak. And perhaps, that's just what people wanted at the time. And I think we can look at that now and say maybe that was just a more innocent time. Perhaps people were more innocent then, and perhaps the people producing these things, including television and the record companies, were extremely conservative. It's very difficult to, I think, overstate exactly how conservative the business side of a lot of the music industry has been historically. They look very much towards, or they used to anyway, look very much to making money. What a surprise. And so they're looking to develop a polished product that delivers money. So that's pretty much it for the first group of songs that I would like to review. And you can see the simplicity of the lyrics. I think that will stand as kind of a platform that we can build on now. We know what the Beatles were kind of making as a band. We know that those are mostly Lennon and McCartney songs. We didn't see too much Ringo and Harrison contributions just yet. And we haven't been able to really detect anything that I would suggest would be a contribution by someone like Mr. Barrett. It's all been very clean and very simple. But perhaps other people are giving their input, but this is so similar in style and delivery that it's very difficult to believe that anyone outside of the group that put together those early songs is doing so in any one of these songs, generating some kind of differentiation between them. So they're all extremely similar. So what I would like to do then is move on to comments and corrections now. And I'll go into the next era of their songs, hopefully tomorrow. I would like to discuss the kind of the beginning of the psychedelic art rock side of the Beatles, for whatever reason. And we'll take a look at that then. So the last thing I would like to do is comments and corrections. We do have some new subscribers. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for checking out the material. And let's take a look at some things that I've noted. One of the first things is that I never considered in our Peeling Syd Barrett Flaming, the song Flaming off of Piper at the Gates of Dawn, that this could have been a reference to Flaming Creatures, which is kind of a play that was popular in '63, put together by Jack Smith. I do wonder now if that's kind of something that was going on. I didn't discuss that, but if so, then that would tie in a bit with Arnold Layne. The ideas of this kind of cross-dressing dude that are presented in Arnold Layne, and then you have a song like Flaming, which could be a reference to Flaming Creatures. I do wonder. I'm not going to overly discuss that, but I wonder if that's something that's happening there. Now, another thing is that Airwaves Official has, as we noted, they did a song of Vegetable Man. They've also done, I guess they're quite influenced by Mr. Barrett as well, which is really cool. They've done a version of Bob Dylan Blues. I'll link that if you'd like to check it out. It's cool to see other folks that are influenced by Syd Barrett. There is Patrick Anderson, who mentioned a review of The Committee, and there are some things, of course, by early Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett that I haven't discussed, like, for example, Zabriskie Point. If you have extensive interest in those things, I guess make a request, add a comment, let me know what you'd like me to look at, and I'll take a look at it. There is Terraphone, who mentioned that our Did Sid Mark Bolan and our breakdown of the Get It On Bang a Gong song is a kind of a take on Chuck Berry's Little Queenie. And thank you very much for that, Terraphone. I very much appreciate when people go in and provide linkages to previous forms of music. Now, the reason for that is, of course, that someone like Mr. Barrett was very much into old, very early blues and rock and roll musicians like Howlin' Wolf. And, of course, Chuck Berry's influence is, in my opinion, quite understated. So it's pretty cool that, yes, I checked out Little Queenie. I'll give you guys a link to Little Queenie. You can check out the lick, the guitar lick for Little Queenie, and recognize the similarity to Get It On. So the real question I was presenting in that Did Sid Mark Bolan thing with Get It On is, why is he playing that same lick later on? You know, is he deliberately doing that to point at that song and say, look, I know that there's something going on there? I don't know, or maybe he's just messing around with the lick to show that he liked it. But I do know that Mr. Barrett liked very old blues musicians. And so the fact that that Chuck Berry played that, I mean, in the book, let's see, Psychedelic Renegades, Mr. Dougie Field specifically mentions that people used to come around. One of them was, of course, Mark Bolan, because he had a very extensive record collection. And it's hard to explain this to people now, but records used to be pretty expensive for the average person, and they couldn't really afford to buy them. So Dougie Fields mentions that he was kind of a DJ that had an extensive record collection, and perhaps Mr. Barrett did as well. I don't know. But not everybody was that well off, and it's kind of hard to describe this to folks now because you can just listen to music pretty much on anything on demand. But it used to be very difficult to listen to anything that wasn't on the radio being played. So actually owning albums was kind of expensive, and actually buying cassette tapes kind of revolutionized things and made music a little bit more accessible, and then CDs, of course, the same. But even then, it was more expensive than what's happening now, and you have to wonder about the overall impact to the industry. But at any rate, yes, thank you, Terraphone. I do appreciate that you recognize that. I don't know how you came about that information, but it's obviously the same lick. And but that doesn't answer the question that I have, you know, is whose idea was it to use that lick? And how many people, I'm sure a lot of people have used that lick over history. The question is, you know, for most folks, is when you add that together with the other implications, what's really going on there with that song, Get It On, Bang and Gong? Okay, now there is also a discussion that I was having with Rats Lay Flat. And he mentions that he felt that Vegetable Man is more of a punk song than a heavy metal song. And I think that's very true. What's interesting to me is that I can hear heavy metal and punk in Vegetable Man. It's a very stripped down, very punky sounding song, but it's also very heavy in delivery with distortion. So in many ways, what's interesting is if you look at the development of Harvest Records under EMI, they would go on to develop progressive rock, punk, and heavy metal. And of course they were working with Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett very early on. Quite interesting, isn't it? And you'll also notice that that kind of was put together around the time of Dark Side of the Moon. Now, one of the questions I asked Rats Lay Flat, and I never did do Peeling Syd Barrett Rats, and of course he has a song called Rats, and I didn't review that song because I don't like it, and part of the reason I don't like it is because it's kind of a nasty song. And I asked this person, Rats Lay Flat, why they like that song, and they kind of gave their opinion on what the meaning of the song may be, which appears to be an attack on the industry's management and ownership. And So I went back and looked through the lyrics again, and I have to agree, it does look like that now. So I didn't know if it was being personally kind of mean to specific people, who was being called rats, whatever. But with that understanding, and you look at it, you can say, yeah, that really does look kind of like an attack on some of the business sides of the music industry. And that perhaps would explain Mr. Barrett's desire to leave the music industry, and perhaps is captured within punk music as a whole later on. At any rate, this is Did Syd Barrett the Beatles Part 1. I'll do a Part 2 and a Part 3 upcoming. Thanks for checking this out. If you've enjoyed the discussion, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you folks later.